Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, April the 26th, 2024. I remember the first time I went to the United States. I was 16 and it was supposedly a politics trip. So I was at a boarding school and I was doing a politics A level. And that's what children do in the United Kingdom from the ages of 16 to 18. If they didn't leave school at 16, then they do an A level. They still do A levels. Anyway, I was doing a politics A level, and there was a politics trip for those that were interested. And the idea was that one would go to Washington, D.C. and maybe look around the Capitol buildings, and also go to Pennsylvania. There were these host families, and they would host the people on a trip, and you'd get to see Pennsylvania from a political perspective. And perhaps the highlight of the trip was supposed to be a visit to Harrisburg, which is the state capital. Well, that was the idea. We never got to Harrisburg. The problem was, this was 1979, and it was in Easter, I suppose, it was maybe late March, beginning of April, and there was a nuclear accident in Harrisburg, just as we were there. That was, of course, 3 Mile Island, and there was a lot of drama. They were throwing away milk, and they certainly didn't want young people visiting Harrisburg, just in case. I'm not sure if anyone actually died or even got cancer as a result of the nuclear accident. I'm pretty sure no one died in the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident. But it was a big event, and while I was there, I got to see a film that had just come out that I think was released on March 16th, 1979. And that was The China Syndrome with, Jack Lemmon and Jane Fonda. I'm not really into films and actors, as you know. But anyway, I got to see China Syndrome. I saw it in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And there was a great line in that film. And I think Jack Lemmon said something like, if I remember rightly, something like, if this thing goes up, it will take out something the size of Pennsylvania. So it was kind of great that you got the Pennsylvania reference in the film of the China Syndrome. And I actually want to look at the chart of the China Syndrome when it was first released to the public, because there are a couple of interesting things about that. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about nuclear accidents in general, and I wanted to look at 4 nuclear accidents. Now, why today? Well, obviously, today is April the 26th, 2024. So it is the 38th anniversary of the Chernobyl accident. Now, I've looked at Chernobyl quite a lot over the last year, so I didn't want to just spend all my time looking at the Chernobyl disaster. I wanted to look at other nuclear accidents. For example, Fukushima in Japan. That was in 2011. And then there was, of course, 3 Mile Island and the Windscale Fire. Now, the Windscale Fire was in northwest England in 1957, and I don't think anyone was killed again, but I think they're fairly certain that people got cancer as a result of that fire. And so that's another accident that I want to look at. I also want to consider the horoscope of nuclear power. When did that pile go critical? Was it 1942, December the 2nd, when they created an atomic pile in a squash court in Chicago? And I want to consider that chart and whether it says anything about future nuclear accident, because I think there is some evidence that the horoscope of the moment when that pile went critical has relevance to future nuclear accidents. But before I discuss nuclear power, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, April the 26th, 2024. It is arguably not a particularly exciting day. We've got the moon in Sagittarius. There we go. This is set for April 26, 2024, noon, New York. By the way, top right, that is 3 Mile Island, that picture on the top right. And so the moon is at 7 Sagittarius. So it's definitely in Sagittarius. Wherever your time zone is, but it doesn't really make many aspects. It makes a sextile to Pluto, and that is pretty much it. It's starting to make a square to Saturn and a sextile to Mercury, but I think that is more about tomorrow rather than today. So you could say that there's really not much going on except for this moon in Sagittarius sextile Pluto in Aquarius. Now, with moon in Sagittarius, it's a very different energy from what we had just recently with the moon in Scorpio. Scorpio is a water sign. It's quite emotional by virtue of being a water sign, and it can be a bit brooding. It doesn't like to talk too much, all things being equal. And the moon in Scorpio is actually fallen. So the moon doesn't actually work too well in Scorpio. Now, that doesn't mean to say you've got any problems if you've got moon, if you happen to have moon in Scorpio, because if you've got moon in Scorpio in your natal chart, you have to deal with moon in Scorpio all the time, and you work out how best to use its energies. But if you have a moon in Scorpio just going through the sky, then yeah, all things being equal, it's not great. And so with the moon moving from Scorpio to Sagittarius, there may be a sense for many of us that things are getting better, that there's more excitement, that there's a spark, with the moon moving into a fire sign, and it sort of creates a bit of energy. And with the moon making a sextile to Pluto, some of us might feel that we can now really assert ourselves on an emotional level. It seems that our feelings, which maybe not so long ago were brooding, now have a means of expression. And if we so wish, we can create a sense of transformation around us. Because it's a sextile, it's not a square. A sextile is about a combination, really, of a trine and a square. Because if you think about it, a sextile it relates to a number 6. It's a sixth of a circle. 6 is 3 times 2. So you've got the 3-ness of the sextile, which is the trine, and you've got the 2-ness of the sextile, which is the opposition, which is kind of a bit like the square. I suppose I should really have said it's like a mixture of the trine and an opposition, to strictly speaking. And so it's not completely easy, the sextile. So a little bit of effort is required, but not a massive amount of effort. So if we want to create a bit of change around us, I think we can, and we can bring our emotions to bear in a constructive way. But as far as the main geocentric aspects, really, that is it. Unless you say, well, the moon is eventually going to a square of Saturn and a trine of Mercury, you might feel that perhaps at the very end of the day if you're in the Americas, but really I think that's more about tomorrow. There are a couple of midpoints that I should perhaps take note of. Like yesterday, the sun is semi-square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And, we had a Mars-Saturn conjunction, when was it? I think it was on April the 10th, so that was a couple of weeks ago. And because the Sun is semi-square the midpoint, to an extent that conjunction is coming back into force. So let me just show you this. There's Mars, there's Saturn. You can see that they're actually 10 degrees apart, or in fact almost 11 degrees apart. So their midpoint is approximately 21 Pisces, and the Sun is at 6 or 7 Taurus. So the Sun is semi-square the midpoint. So there's still a bit of a Mars-Saturn feel. In fact, the Mars-Saturn feel may have sort of disappeared or reduced to almost nothing. And then it's coming back into focus. And so there might still be a certain sense of frustration, but it's still a little difficult to get things done. And, we shouldn't forget that the Sun on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can be about concerns about death and destruction. And, we look around us, look at the world, and we can see that we do live in a dangerous world and in a world where bad things happen. Another aspect to a midpoint that's going on today is Mars making a conjunction to the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. So you see there's Uranus, there's Pluto, and right now Mars is right in between Uranus and Pluto, on the midpoint directly. So Mars on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint can be about the desire to make things happen. Uranus and Pluto is about dramatic change. Uranus, the planet of revolution, Pluto, the planet of transformation. You bring them together. We want to turn everything upside down, particularly when Mars is on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. And that perhaps chimes with the fact that the Moon is now in Sagittarius. The Moon is in Sagittarius. We want action. We've just got through the Moon in being in Scorpio, in a water sign, in a rather passive position in some respects, but now the moon is in Sagittarius. We want action, and that is reflected by the fact that Mars is conjunct the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. We do have to be a bit careful, though. It can be a little bit dangerous, Mars on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, so we mustn't be in too much of a hurry to make things happen. From a heliocentric perspective, again, it's fairly quiet. Let me just show you what's happening heliocentrically. Putting the Sun in the center of the solar system. We have not really any direct aspects, except the Earth is making a semi-sextile to Mercury. Remember, the Earth is always opposition in the heliocentric chart where the Sun is in the geocentric chart. So the Sun is at around 7 Taurus. Therefore, the Earth will be at 7 Scorpio. And the Earth and Mercury are in semi-sextile. So if you've got Earth and Mercury semi-sextile, it is about perhaps the struggle to communicate. Many of us may feel that in order to really function properly and happily on this planet, we have got something to say, and we really need to say it. And people in general have something to say. Remember, the heliocentric chart is more impersonal, more collective from the geocentric chart. There's no moon in the heliocentric chart. There's no ascendant in the geocentric chart. There's in the heliocentric chart. There's no moon, no ascendant, and the Earth is semi-sextile Mercury. So in general, we live in a world where people are trying to get their message across and not always being particularly successful. There are some midpoint aspects involving Mars. So there's Mars. Heliocentric Mars is at 29.2 Aquarius, and it is on the Mercury-Uranus midpoint. I think you can see that. That's quite clear. And it's on the Neptune-Pluto midpoint. So that Mars may be quite strong from a heliocentric perspective. Mars conjunct Mercury-Uranus, really wanting something to say, and also having powerful thoughts. Our brains are going into overdrive. The collective, its brains are going into overdrive, and we may see people struggling to say things and saying things quite abruptly with Mars conjunct the Mercury-Uranus midpoint. And we wonder what is actually influencing those words. Mars conjunct the Neptune-Pluto midpoint. You know, Neptune-Pluto as a pair is quite high level. It's these sort of cosmic forces that are sometimes a bit difficult to understand, but they're still having an impact, and perhaps they're influencing not just what we say, but what we are doing. One final midpoint is Neptune. Neptune is on the Venus-Saturn midpoint from a heliocentric perspective. So if Neptune's on the Venus-Saturn midpoint, that could be about collective delusion, believing that everything is fine, but then realizing it's not fine at all. Having fantasies about community, Venus-Saturn, and then realizing that's Venus is a community, and then that Neptune is a fantasy, and Saturn is a realization that it's just not, there's no community at all. So fantasies about togetherness, which we realize are that, complete fantasies, because we see evidence that we actually are living in quite a divided society, and we just mustn't resort to sort of woolly thinking about people getting on with each other, because in many respects people don't get on with each other, and if we try to get on with other people, it's just not going to work. And that's not personal, I'm talking about the collective here, because it is the heliocentric chart. But overall, looking at the astrology today, I must emphasize that I don't see a great deal going on. And if you look at things from fundamentally from just straight planetary aspects, then it's all about moon sextile Pluto. And that might reflect how I do my forecast for the 12 signs, which I'm just about to do. There's not a great deal for me to work on, so it's possible that my readings for the 12 signs are briefer than usual. And that's what I'm going to now do. I'm going to look at the 12 signs, and I'm going to do my forecasts for today, which is Friday, April the 26th, 2024. Aries, it's a better day. You feel a lot more energized, and I think a lot more optimistic. Recently, you've had some quite powerful feelings, and you haven't really felt that you were able to fully express yourself. Maybe the world just seemed too complicated. Maybe you were having to just deal with the reality of other people's feelings, and it almost brought you to a standstill. Feelings which, as far as you were concerned, weren't always constructive. There's nothing worse from an Aries perspective than people to get wrapped up in the way they feel and not really express it, and you have to kind of imagine what they're feeling, and maybe you want to say something or do something to move things forward, but when you try, nothing much happens. But now Moon is in Sagittarius, and you're starting to see possibilities, and also you're aware of some of your power. And this is power that doesn't have to be expressed in an over-the-top or brutal way. It's about being yourself and creating possibilities, not just for you, but also for the people around you. And I think actually, Aries, you will come over as being quite an exciting person. And, this is a standard sort of Aries trait. In general, Aries as a sign is one of the more exciting and interesting signs. I mean, maybe I'm saying that from a Gemini perspective, because Geminis are very much in their head, a lot of thoughts, but action may be more of a problem. And sort of in the past, when I've come across Aries, I've always found that Aries, they're not just about ideas; they're just about action. They have interesting ideas. But certainly, as far as I'm concerned, Aries is a very sort of interesting people, and they make the world more exciting. And the world really needs to have people like you, and that's how you may be perceived. And the world having just gone through the Moon in Scorpio, you're a breath of fresh air, or not just a breath, but sort of a tongue of fire. You set things on fire in a pleasant way, and maybe that's what you can do, and you can, in your own way, create a bit of transformation. But a transformation, I think, that everyone can benefit from, though you could potentially take things too far. We shouldn't forget that Mars, your ruler, from a geocentric perspective, is on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. Some Arians are going to feel that something really has to change. You're just not satisfied with the status quo. You're just not happy with the way things are, and you are going to be in the mood for taking action, overturning existing structures. Now, maybe this is something that needs to be done, in which case you need to do your planning, and you need to do a little bit of thinking. I know that as an Aries, you shouldn't do too much thinking, because that's not really in your nature. You are an action-orientated sign, but still, you do have to think through the consequences of what you're trying to put into action. Though I do think that if you get it right, if you get the balance right, you really can cause quite a lot of change. And I think in many cases it can be constructive change. Taurus, you do realize that things have shifted a bit. That from your perspective, things seem to be moving a little bit faster than you would have liked. Remembering that Taurus is a fixed sign, and it's an earth sign, fixed earth. It likes things to move in a particular way, and right now, with the moon moving into Sagittarius, there may be a certain sense that it's all running away from you. I mean, not in a way that's particularly dramatic, but it just feels a little bit disconcerting. And you may want to hold back your own inner fire, which I talked about. Everyone's got inner fire, and I was suggesting that with Aries, but I've just been talking to Aries, but with Aries, that inner fire is something that needs to be manifested. But with you, your inner fire is something you want to keep hold of. You want to keep the light burning in a more private way. And I think that's all right. But you could take things too far, and there's some danger that you resist change. and you just don't want to have anything to do with it. And at the same time, you may be tempted to hold back some of your input and your feelings. And again, I'm not convinced that that is an especially good idea, because what you should be doing now, Taurus, is telling people what's on your mind. There are things on your mind, for sure. And the world needs to know where you stand. Because if you don't tell the world where you stand, what will happen is people will make assumptions. People will say, well, you're not complaining, let's just get on with it. But if you don't complain now, you can't complain after the fact. So if something's wrong, or you don't like the way things are moving, you need to tell people what you think. And the earlier you do it, the more reasoned and smooth you will sound. If you leave it late, then you'll perhaps just be seen as a bit of a troublemaker. So really, you do need to bear that in mind. I should also say that there are certain things going on around you which on the surface do seem rather complicated. And that's perhaps another reason why you want to hold back. You perhaps take the view that if you don't understand something, you're not going to comment on it. But if you don't comment on something you don't understand, then you will remain in a position of ignorance. Because if you don't comment, you won't hear what other people have to say. You won't hear any explanations. And if you ask simple questions, you won't be treated as stupid. You'll just be treated as someone curious who needs to know the facts, and you'll be told the facts. And so that's another reason for being open about the way you feel. Now, I'm not suggesting, Taurus, that you are powerless. The main aspect today is a sextile between the Moon and Pluto. And through this sextile between the Moon and Pluto, you are in a position to make things happen, especially in terms of career, work, business. Your opinions do matter, and you can express your opinions in whatever way you feel is right. You trust your feelings on that matter. And when you start expressing yourself and you tell people how you want things to be, then people will listen, and you can actually create some kind of transformation. And if you want something from an organization or a company, I mean, maybe you want a job, or maybe you want something to happen within your job. If you want something to happen, then you can make it happen. And if you write a letter or email, or you tell someone something, you will be heard. Now, it might not seem that you're being heard, but actually you are being heard. And Taurus, you can create changes which I feel that you can definitely benefit from. Gemini. Mercury is your ruler, and it continues to be conjunct the North Node. Mercury is moving away from the North Node. And I talked about Mercury being conjunct the North Node yesterday, but it's still there. And I would really urge you, Gemini, to take advantage of this conjunction between Mercury and the North Node. And when I was talking about Gemini yesterday, I was talking about some of the existential issues that Gemini can have. And remember, I'm saying this as a Gemini, and I was talking about these existential issues on the comments. I think other people commenting were aware of this existential problem with Gemini. What is the purpose? why are we here? And Geminis can grapple with this. And we need any clues we can get about our purpose and what we're supposed to be doing. Any clues. And so with Mercury conjunct the North Node, we are being given clues. Take advantage of it. We don't want to have to wait. I don't know when the next time Mercury is conjunct the North Node. That'll be in a year's time. We don't want to wait. Take advantage of it, or approximately a year's time. We are given clear indications today about what we should be doing and what our purpose is, and indeed why we're on this planet. So make an effort there. If you feel that you're being propelled in a particular direction, then give it a go. And I think that this direction may be connected with how you interact with other people. It may not be the people themselves that matter. It's about what happens when you're with other people, what you hear, kind of feedback the feedback you're getting, good and bad. Because sometimes seeing something bad can actually be good in the sense that it gives us an idea about what we're supposed to be doing. Perhaps, for example, when we're talking to people, we'll realize that there's a problem, that some aspect of society is falling apart, is in a state of decay, and we want to do something about it. And this links with the concept of hopes and wishes. It's okay to have hopes and wishes, Gemini. And those hopes and wishes shouldn't primarily be about money and our own personal aggrandizement. It's about our hopes and wishes for society at large and what we can do to make these hopes and wishes come true, even if it is hopeless. Sometimes we get engaged with an activity that appears hopeless, but we can be telling ourselves that what else can we do? We have to try our best, even if the situation is hopeless or appears hopeless. But maybe once we start working away at it and we don't ask ourselves too many questions, then we will realize that in some way it's not quite as hopeless as we had imagined. And this may link to another theme going on in Gemini's life at the moment. And this is about working with a situation that seems difficult. Not necessarily for us personally, but for the world at large. And normally when we're in a difficult situation or we're working with something that is really difficult, we would just give up on it. Gemini mind would just think, well, what is the point? Why are we doing this? It is a waste of time, so I should really be doing something else. But today, Geminis can be a little more detached about it. They can say, yes, it's possible that it's going nowhere, but somehow I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm going to not despair, not allow myself to give in to negativity. I'm just going to continue. I'm going to be emotionally detached a little bit. Emotional detachment, Geminis are very good at being emotionally detached. If you can be a little bit emotionally detached when doing something that may seem ever so slightly hopeless, that may allow you to keep going. And who knows, at some stage you might realize that you can actually engineer change. And what seems to be hopeless may actually be a real possibility, and that will be down to you and your persistence. Cancer. The moon is now definitely out of Scorpio and it is in Sagittarius. And from a Cancerian perspective, the moon in Sagittarius perhaps isn't great. I mean, Cancer and Sagittarius are very different signs. Cancer is a water sign. It's cardinal water, whereas moon in Sagittarius, that is fixed fire, mutable fire. And you might feel that things just don't really come together very well. But at the same time, that moon in Sagittarius describes you. I mean, the moon is your ruler, and it's in Sagittarius. That is telling you how best to express yourself. And with moon in Sagittarius, a bit of action, a bit of vision, a bit of fire can be quite important and can be very useful, provided it is put in the right direction. And today, Cancer, it's a bit like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle. I suppose people don't do jigsaw puzzles anymore because they've got video games. Is that right? I don't know. That's something from the past. I've never really been into jigsaw puzzles, but jigsaw puzzles are like you've got this mass of confusion. You've got loads of pieces all over the place, and you've got to bring the pieces together, and there's a certain sense of inspiration there, or intuition there. You see two, you might have, I don't know, remember, I used to have huge jigsaw puzzles, with thousands of pieces, and you might see two pieces that appear to have no connection, and you feel there is a connection, and you work, and you put them together, and you try something, and then suddenly these two pieces that appear to have no connection, they're actually connected, because you then find another piece, and that fits together, and it all comes together, and then you finally got your picture. I don't know, what's it of? A Swiss mountain, or something like that, isn't it? With a jigsaw puzzle. And that perhaps is what today is going to be about. Dealing with a situation that seems to be a bit of a mess, just a pile of random pieces, but you just sort through it all, and sooner or later the pieces come together, and before you know it, you've got the big picture. So that, Cancer, is something that I really think you should work on. And through this inspirational organization, you can actually create change, because you are altering the world, and you're altering the world in terms of your vision. And at first it might be hard work, but sooner or later the world is going to realize that you are altering it, and that you're having an impact. Now, not many people may be aware of that impact, Cancer, but it is certainly happening. So don't worry if the world that you're living in right now seems at odds with who you are. You just have to work on it a bit, and soon enough the connections will come together, and in your own way you will feel at home, and not just at home, but you will be feeling that you are actually in a powerful position. Leo, I should point out that the Sun is your ruler, and that the Sun is aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It needn't be a big deal, but I do think that it is something that you have to be aware of. And the problem with the Sun, your ruler, being aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint is that it can encourage you to have a few rather negative feelings about the world and where it's going. You might think, for example, that it's going nowhere. Alternatively, you may be tempted to concentrate on the things that are bad and to ignore the things that are good, or at least things that have a possibility. And so some Leos may take the view that it is so difficult that it's not worth engaging with, and there might even be a sense of fear. But what's happening is that you're just picking up on this Mars-Saturn conjunction. The Mars-Saturn conjunction was exact on April the 10th, and it was difficult, and it made things very slow. It made people realize that life was dangerous, and you're now picking up on it again. And I wouldn't get too obsessed about it, especially now, because things are picking up for you. And what you don't want to do, Leo, is just completely focus on one thing. Maybe you're on your fears or your security concerns, because the moon is out of Scorpio. Maybe when the moon was in Scorpio, yesterday it started moving out of Scorpio. Today it's definitely out of Scorpio. Now that the moon is in Sagittarius, things have changed. You can lighten up. After all, Leo, Sagittarius is a fire sign. Leo is a fire sign. With the moon in Sagittarius, you can think about possibilities, and you can also think about what you can do and what you're good at. And when you're considering what you are good at, it's very important not to have any doubts. And of course, if you've got the Sun aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint, you might well have doubts. You might think you're not good enough, for if you were to do what you were good at, it might be dangerous. Well, I think you've got to put those fears to one side, because things really have changed. And I think that you're going to come over as an exciting person, and people are going to want to know about you, and they're going to know about what you can do. And you can do things your way without having to compromise. And that will be greatly appreciated. And it starts in quite a private way. Because you're not acting in a way that is just in accordance with what other people want. You're doing things your way. But when you start doing things your way, you start having a fortunate impact on the world around you and on particular individuals. Perhaps individuals who in the past had been a problem, or who you hadn't really understood, who you hadn't been able to connect with, but now you can connect with them. And in the process, you can create something very good and very healthy. But Leo, that does mean that you really do have to believe in yourself. Virgo. As I was telling Gemini, Mercury is still conjunct the North Node. And of course, Mercury is your ruler. And so when we've got Mercury conjunct the North Node, we have an idea of where you're supposed to be going. And I think I talked about this yesterday, Mercury conjunct the North Node, and I just want to remind you that it's still there. And that does mean that you continue to have insights about what you're supposed to be doing. And what you're supposed to be doing is taking things seriously and not just being sidetracked by surface appearances. I mean, that can be a Virgo thing. Many Virgos like to keep things simple and straightforward, and they take the view that if they get too deeply into something, it gets complicated and they lose control. Well, with Mercury conjunct the North Node, this is a reminder that you should not be afraid of complications. If something doesn't make sense, then you need to understand why it doesn't make sense. And perhaps you need to ask questions and go to places where you haven't been before. Go into the depths even. The depths, I don't know, digging through archives. Maybe the archives of your brain, of your memories. Just going through it all, really trying to get to the bottom of the thing. And it is the right thing to do, absolutely. Because once you understand what's going on deep down, actually things are going to be a lot more secure and a lot more comprehensible. And in the process, Virgo, there's no need to be seen or heard, perhaps. Because today, with the moon moving into Sagittarius, I think that you're going to really want to focus on your own resources. I don't think you're going to need to have too many people around you. If you think about it, you have a clear idea what needs to be done and also what needs to be organized, because there is a sextile aspect between the moon and Pluto. And from a Virgoan perspective, this Pluto, which is in Aquarius, is very much an organizing principle. It's through organization you create change. Through reconfiguring things, moving things around, you can actually totally transform your environment. And especially the environment where you are most familiar, your home environment, where you feel most comfortable. So work away on that and don't allow yourself to be limited by external pressure. It's not the external pressure that matters. You just need to understand things. And don't be satisfied with a superficial understanding today. What matters is real, deep, emotional understanding. And that does take a bit of effort, may even take a bit of bravery, but I think, Virgo, you can do it. Libra. The moon is moving into Sagittarius. Well, it's definitely in Sagittarius right now. And from a Libran perspective, I think that is good news, because it does give you more space and it makes it easier for you to express yourself. I mean, self-expression is always important for Librans. I mean, Libra is an air sign. Air is about communication. The moon in Sagittarius is very much how you communicate and how you make sure everyone understands you. And there are many ways in which you can get people to understand you. You can talk to them, you can send them messages, you can maybe even visit them. A short visit could be highly beneficial, perhaps an unannounced visit, because if you suddenly appear and you suddenly tell someone what's on your mind, you're likely to have an impact. After all, the main astrological aspect today is the moon sextile Pluto. That is about you having an influence through the things you say. And you don't really have to think about it too much. I know that Librans can be very concerned about the impression they're giving, and there can be a lot of impression management with Librans. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. You don't overthink the matter. Try to be a little bit intuitive and try to understand what people are saying, what they want, and I think you'll get the balance absolutely right. And don't be afraid of communicating with authority figures and people who in some ways seem to have a higher status than you. I mean, I know we shouldn't be thinking about status, but in reality there's always people that appear to have higher status or seem to have more power than us. And we shouldn't be afraid of communicating with these people, because again, we're going to know what to say, and we will know how to have an influence. And again, we're not going to have to think about it. It will just come very naturally. I should also say that people need to know about you. Sometimes you gets forgotten, and people need to know about you and your experiences and how you see things, because that sometimes gets forgotten. And today that really does need to be expressed. And you shouldn't worry too much about how people are going to respond. It's not about just being positive and being happy, saying how wonderful things are and getting involved in pleasantries. People need to know about you in your entirety and what your identity is all about. I mean, that might seem a tall order, but if you can get your identity across in all its complexities, then I think the response could very much go in your favour. So don't hold back. Scorpio. Scorpio, your ruler is Mars, and Mars is doing some interesting stuff at the moment. And in terms of the shorter term future, looking at the next few days, you shouldn't forget, Scorpio, that Mars is moving towards a conjunction of Neptune. Now, it's not quite there yet. Maybe you're still not feeling it, but I think it's slowly starting to make an impression. And with Mars conjunct Neptune, there may be a growing sense of uncertainty, that you're dealing with something that is becoming increasingly complicated, and at the same time your imagination is beginning to roar into life. You can imagine things, you can dream things, you see things that you don't normally see. Your feelings are starting to get more intense, and Neptune represents some broader collective, perhaps spiritual vision, that it knocks down boundaries. And that's perhaps something you're beginning to experience. You're maybe beginning to connect with everyone, with the collective unconscious, with Mars moving towards this conjunction of Neptune. Some of the things you're starting to feel may not be your own personal material, that you're starting to feel the energy of the collective. And I think you should observe it, but not take it too personally. Just remind yourself that you are connected to this collective, that none of us are sort of completely isolated, that we do have to deal with us as members of a group, and those spiritual and non-physical connections really have to be understood as well as we can. But understanding when you're dealing with Neptune is difficult. I'm not going to say impossible, but it's an understanding that can't really take place on an intellectual level. It's something non-verbal. But if anyone can deal with non-verbal, non-cognitive understanding, it's surely a Scorpio. Now that seems very pie in the sky, and perhaps that's a note for the short-term future. There are other things going on today. The moon is out of your sign for sure. it's now in Sagittarius, and I actually think that's quite a good thing, the moon being out of Scorpio for you. I think that you're going to take things a little less seriously. You won't be quite so focused just on you, and you may actually feel that you've got some more room to maneuver than usual. And there are things you can do in the real world that could actually be to your material benefit. So I've just talked about all the spirituality of Neptune and its link with the cosmos, but there is a material side to what's going on today. And through your own intuition, you can actually make some connections and understand what needs to be done to improve your financial situation. Yeah, something can be done. And you're starting to understand that there is a gap, that two things need to be connected and they're not connected. Maybe it's something you need to say, maybe you've got a couple of ideas and you know that this could work and could be profitable for you, but you just haven't brought them together so far. But now you can actually start to see the connections. And if you're able to make those connections, which I think you actually can, then you should be in a good position to profit from the situation. Then you have to consider, Scorpio, how actually are you going to handle yourself today? Because I can't help noticing the fact that Mars, which is your ruler, okay, it's not just moving towards a conjunction of Neptune, it's on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint. So if Mars is on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, that indicates that some Scorpios are not going to be happy with the way things are, and they're going to want to create some kind of change, and the sooner the better. And you are someone, Scorpio, who is quite influential. You don't actually have to take the world as you see it. If you think things could be better, or perhaps you even think everything should be turned upside down and people should start again. So if you're of that view, then yeah, you can actually do something to make it happen. But is that what you want to do? I mean, you have to ask yourself, how are you going to create the kind of transformation that you feel is necessary? And Scorpio is a real transformation sign. And I suppose transformation for Scorpios needs to start with yourself. I suppose one of the images of Scorpio is the snake changing its skin, not just hiding under a rock, but hiding under a rock so that it can shed its skin in peace and quiet, and then move out into the world as someone completely new. And so perhaps change needs to start with you first, before you try to impose your need for change on the outside world. So you have to consider the balance. Is it about you that needs to create change, or is it in yourself, or does the world have to fit in with the way you see it, and if necessary have to accept considerable disruption? And yes, Scorpio, if you want, you can really disrupt things, but ask yourself, how far do you want to go? And ask yourself why you are doing what you're doing. What you don't want to do, as I've already suggested, is you don't want to project your own feelings onto the outside world unless until you're... Well, I mean, projection is important. I mean, we always hear about projection being a bad thing. Oh, you're projecting your material. Actually, sometimes projection is important. I mean, that's where it all starts from. We start with our own inner battles, and we project our inner battles onto the outside world. And I think that's how every successful person functions. And so it may be, Scorpio, that you have these projections, you have your inner battles, but actually these inner battles, it's now time to project them outwards, in which case you're going to get results. Whether they're good or bad results kind of depends how you handle the situation. Sagittarius. The moon is now certainly in your sign, and that makes you feel comfortable. Sagittarius is a fire sign. Sagittarius likes action, and with the moon in Sagittarius, you feel that you're now in the right place and that you are definitely able to have an impact. And Sagittarius, you are now in a position to be able to tell the world what you want. And you don't have to spend ages and ages getting the words out. Maybe you don't even have to say very much. Your mere presence is indicating what you want, and you should not be afraid of expressing this desire. It will be easy. I mean, relatively easy. You are not going to be using complicated words, especially if you look at what's going on in the sky astrologically. There are no personal or social planets in air signs. Okay, we've got the South Node in Libra. We have got Pluto in Aquarius. But the personal planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, none of them are in air signs at the moment. And I think that may work to your advantage. It means that you don't have to spend time explaining yourself. People don't expect explanations. They just expect people they just expect strong words, clear directions, and if you keep it simple, then that's enough. And so just express your feelings and your opinions in a clear way, using perhaps as few words as possible. And the more simple you are, the more effective you will be. And I think that you're going to be in a position of great power. And possibly you're going to be, one of the strongest of the 12 signs. And it's just about keeping it simple. And I said at the beginning of this video that there aren't many aspects today. Really, all there is Moon sextile Pluto. And so, because there aren't many aspects today, it does mean, again, that things are simple. And really, there is absolutely no need to overcomplicate things. And I think that you might also find that what some people are looking for is direction. They just want to be told where they want to be told where to go, because they may not be able to work it out for themselves. And that does put you in a strong position, because if people are confused, they don't know what to do, they don't know where they're going, they don't know perhaps why they're on this planet, maybe they're Geminis, it's very easy to just come up with a clear vision. You just say, well, it's like this, it's very simple. This is how it's supposed to be. And they're going to say, great, because you're prepared to come off the fence and tell it how it is. And that can put you in a very strong position. And I think it can give you a certain sense of leadership. Of course, Sagittarius, you do need to exercise a little bit of responsibility. yes, you can be influential, but you have to ask, how are you influencing people, and are you making absolutely sure that your influence is constructive? But really, Sagittarius, you have a good heart. You want the best for everyone. And I think that today the world is going to see you as a real bonus. Capricorn. Capricorn, you may feel with the moon moving into Sagittarius that really there isn't a great deal that you want to do or that you need to do. That is because Sagittarius is the sign immediately before Capricorn, and it can be quite insular, asking itself, is there really any real necessity of taking the initiative? Maybe you should, take the view that, other people can take the initiative. You can just relax. Maybe that's the case, that you can relax. But I don't think you should entirely relax today, because there are definitely things that you need to be working on. And what you need to be working on, Capricorn, is your own abilities. You have abilities which, if you're in a madly sociable world, lots of people around you having to deal with the pressures of, I don't know, whether it's employers, bureaucrats, all that kind of thing. Maybe even your friends asking you things, making demands on your time. You don't really have a great sense of yourself. But today you have an opportunity to really work on what you can do in your own way. And I think you might start to realize that there's something you're good at, which you haven't fully expressed, and now you can bring this ability to bear in terms of actually achieving your goals. But in the first instance, it's probably a good idea, Capricorn, if you keep it quite secretive, quite private. And as of yesterday, I mentioned this yesterday, Capricorn, that ideally you should spend time at home or in somewhere you feel comfortable. This is where you're going to be most constructive, and you shouldn't feel any pressure to reveal your true feelings. Some things really do need to be kept secret, though. Don't 100% ignore other people, because from a relationship perspective, there does seem to be someone who is not really able to fully express themselves. They're keeping something quiet, a bit like you. And you need to be aware of that. And in spite of the fact that you almost feel that you are in a shell, that you want to be in a shell, there is someone else that needs to be brought out of their shell. And that might relate to someone you know very well, someone you spend all your time with even. And they're just not revealing something. And there is something going on, and you need to work out what that is. So in terms of close relationships, I'm not convinced that you should be entirely passive. I think you should be open to the possibility of helping someone express their real feelings, not just their feelings, but their desires and what they want. Because some people are not being particularly open about what they want, and they may feel that nobody cares. But I think you might care, So if you can tease out this information, tease out these desires, you might be making someone's life a little bit better. Aquarius. At the moment, Aquarius, I think that you're in a fairly sociable mood, certainly more sociable than you felt, yesterday or the day before. And I think that you will enjoy people's company. And at the same time, with the moon making a sextile aspect to Pluto, you're going to be quite influential. I mean, remember, Pluto is at the beginning of your sign. You're getting used to Pluto being in Aquarius, and Pluto is asking you to take yourself seriously, and also to accept the possibility that you are someone who can create positive transformation. And with the moon making a sextile to Pluto, this is something you can do, and you can be quite powerful in terms of your social life. So if you're connecting with other people, whether it's face-to-face or over the phone, the power of your personality will be very clear, and you can get people to change in a constructive way. I don't think that today you're a control freak. Rather, you can create gentle change which is in accord with other people's personalities and needs. And so in that sense, I think that you can be a really beneficial influence. Though, don't forget about your core abilities. There are many ways to do things, many pressures on you, but you need to do things in such a way that your own abilities come to the fore, and that you're able to take advantage of everything that's on offer. Because at the moment, Aquarians seem to be quite sensitive, and they have a good sense of what sounds right and what is right. And I'm sort of meaning that perhaps in a musical sense, or in terms of maybe coming up with business ideas. It's all about art, business, these kind of things you have a natural affinity with today. And you shouldn't hold back. And maybe, Aquarius, you need to work on these things and what you can do, and maybe you can bring other people in. So if you've got ideas relating to art and business, and or rather art or business, because it could be art and business, it depends who you are and depends what your interests are. It needn't just be art and business, it could be literature, it could be drama, whatever you're involved with. If you have ideas in this direction, I think you'll find that people really want to hear what you've got to say, because your sense of art and talent and aesthetic harmony is actually very good today. And it would be a shame if you didn't really communicate it. And I think today you can communicate it, and I think that people will be impressed, and perhaps through other people, some of your talents can be not just expressed, but you can actually maybe start a new venture even. Okay, it needn't be a particularly grand venture, but a new venture involving your skill and other people's support can definitely be a possibility today. Pisces, you're in the mood for making things happen, and I think you certainly benefit from the moon being in Sagittarius. You have a certain vision, you can see how things should be, And I don't think, Pisces, you're afraid of expressing yourself. And I think, Pisces, you've actually got quite a lot to express. You've got things to say, and you know how things should be. And so it's okay to have a high profile and even rather noisy day. Don't be afraid of making noise. I know that traditionally Pisces is a mute sign along with the other two water signs. That's because fish are supposed not to make any noise. Scorpions don't make a noise, and crabs don't make a noise. So the three water signs are sometimes called the mute signs. But I wouldn't be mute today. You definitely need to be heard. You've got things to say, and you have got a vision that certainly needs to be expressed. And you don't really want to mince your words, if you're honest with yourself. Now, you might be afraid of causing offence, but I don't think you should be afraid. I think you need to just say it as it is, because you've got a powerful message, and I do think that people are going to listen to you. And the power of your message may not be immediately obvious to you. It seems that, at the moment, Pisceans have been keeping a lot secret. And when I say at the moment, I'm really talking about perhaps of a whole year, since January, when Pluto went into Aquarius. So when Pluto went into Aquarius, you perhaps, you started sort of becoming aware of your own power, but at some level you didn't want to reveal this power. You wanted to keep it to yourself. Well, now might be a time when you need to release some of this power. It's perhaps been building up. And if you feel that something should happen with Moon sextile Pluto, then make it happen. And don't be afraid, because I think it's all for the good. Remember, it's a Moon sextile Pluto. All things being equal, Moon sextile Pluto is a fortunate aspect, and you do get a real chance to have an impact. Of course, maybe it's quite scary to have an impact. When you actually think something, do something, say something, and the world starts to reconfigure itself because of what you're doing. Yes, that can be scary, but I don't think you should be afraid of that. And particularly today, it's all very gentle. You say you want something, and it just happens very naturally. And at the same time, I think that you can help other people. I think that people need someone like you. People are looking for something. Everyone is looking for something. So much has been destroyed and taken away, and the ground on which people stand is so uncertain. But if you can express your power and express your certainty that you're on the right track, if people can pick up on that, they're going to think, oh yeah, okay, that's good. Things aren't so complicated. Pisces can actually make things simpler. And this ability of yours at the moment to just be yourself, not to analyze too much, should help you if you're in any form of public position, or if you're working or involved in an organization, or trying to start a new venture. Your openness and your capacity to say what's on your mind without worrying too much about other people's reaction is going to really help you. And so, Pisces, I think that overall it looks like a simple day when things are really obvious, when things are pretty easy, when you can just be yourself and be happy, and you can, in your own way, make the world better. And that's it for the 12 signs. And I am now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. And I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I threw because I threw the coins. I took 3 coins. I threw them up in the air 6 times. And the first hexagram I got was keeping still. I know that the moon is in Sagittarius, and we've been thinking about some of the action involved with the moon in Sagittarius, but from the I Ching's perspective, there's nothing much that we should be doing. If we were to move too much, we might be messing things up. But at the same time, we are feeling anxious. Third line moves. And we feel we would like to do something. After all, the moon is in Sagittarius. It's been in Scorpio. Scorpio is about perhaps staying in one place. It is quite a fixed sign, Scorpio. But now the moon is in Sagittarius. We feel we want to do something, but we also feel we shouldn't do something. And so we're feeling quite tense with this third line moving. And what the I Ching advises is we don't want to be too rigid, to try too hard to stay still. We might think that what we're supposed to do is stay quiet and meditate. But, meditation, if we're really feeling anxious, could be a real problem. I mean, I don't know, meditation for me, I've tried meditating. The problem with meditation for me is that meditation is just too much stress. I just couldn't stand the stress of meditating. And so that's why I stopped trying to meditate, because it was just too stressful. I mean, that's me, because meditation, going back to this hexagram, keeping still, is about enforced stillness. You're supposed to stay still, and you're, I don't know, like with, is it transcendental meditation? I did try that. I paid quite a lot of money for it. That was a long time ago. That was in the 80s. It just didn't work because it was too much stress. But this stress of trying to keep still we mustn't push it. At a certain stage, we're going to have to just say, well, we can't be too tough on ourselves. And so a bit of action might be required. And also the I Ching is indicating with keeping still that we shouldn't try to force things. If it doesn't come naturally, then don't bother. And I suppose that's with meditation. If it doesn't come naturally, don't bother. If any form of discipline that you try to impose upon yourself, or stillness that you try to impose upon yourself doesn't work, then it doesn't work. It's just not going to happen. And then the fifth line moves. And with the fifth line, remember, moon is in Sagittarius. Moon in Sagittarius, we need to be a bit careful what we say with the fifth line. And here, keeping still perhaps is important. Yeah, we have got things we would like to say with moon in Sagittarius. But if we say them, there could be trouble, and we might say something that causes offence. So we do need to be a bit careful what we say. And we've got these two lines moving, so we do move to a different hexagram. And the hexagram it moves to is, in some ways, is more of the same, because it's hexagram 20, which is contemplation. So with contemplation, you get the idea that the ablution has been made, but not the sacrifice. So the ablution is about you wash yourself before doing something of religious or spiritual significance, but you haven't actually made the sacrifice. You haven't actually done what you're supposed to be doing. You've prepared yourself, but you're pausing. And we have to wait and consider the situation. And maybe this also links with the fact that, you know, Mercury has just gone stationary direct. Yes, Mercury is now going forward, but it still is pretty slow. And that's a concept of contemplation. We're not really ready to take the initiative yet. There's still things we need to think about, and we need to understand. You know, you look at the hexagram. You look at both hexagrams. Let's go back to the previous hexagram, keeping still. You've got sort of the mountain over a mountain. I mean, this keeping still hexagram is about the mountain. So you've got a sort of a platform, sort of mountainous-like structure. And then you look at contemplation. Hexagram number 20 is again, you've got something quite mountainous. It's like a platform. It's a stable platform, but it is about contemplation. There is nothing that should be done, or nothing important that we should be doing, because we've got things to think about, and we've got to work out what our own position in the matter actually is. Though there is a view with contemplation that, in terms of dealing with authority figures, we should perhaps be, I don't like to use the word subservient, but we need to be respectful of authority figures. We shouldn't feel that we need to assert ourselves and try to usurp authority figures, or even tell people what we really think. We should perhaps be faithful to those that are higher up in the structure, or higher up in the hierarchy. I don't know how that sounds for you in terms of your particular situation, but that perhaps is something to be considered. And that is the I Ching, and now I want to turn to matters nuclear. And today, after all, is the 38th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster. And I wanted to actually start off with the release of the China syndrome. So the China syndrome was this film with, I think it had Michael Douglas and Jack Lemmon and Jane Fonda, and this film, I think, had a budget of about $6 million, and it made $50 million, which in 1979 I think it was regarded as being a successful film. And the chart for the release of the public release of China syndrome actually wasn't great. And I wanted to just share this chart with you. So this is a chart for when a China syndrome was released on March 16th, 1979. I have no idea what time it was released. But it was sometime on March 16th. I'm assuming that the moon was void of course in, potentially void of course in, well, probably not void of course, but the moon was in very late Libra. I don't think that they get released in the evening. I don't know. I have no idea what time it was standard to release films in 1979. You probably know more than me. But notice that the moon wasn't entirely void, of course, that it was, let's say, probably not void, of course, because the moon was making a square to Jupiter, and Jupiter was very late at 29 degrees Cancer. So there would have been a 2-hour window where the moon was void, which would have been probably New York time, 2 hours in the afternoon on March the 16th. But I suspect when the film was released, the moon was applying to a square of Jupiter. But a square to Jupiter, Jupiter retrograding Cancer, is this the chart of a film that did pretty well? It was a success. Where is the success in this chart? I would have said that the success in this chart is partly to do with the fact that the moon is in the Via Combusta. Now, the moon in the Via Combusta is, remember, the Via Combusta is that part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio, where things happen that you weren't expecting to happen. Your plans are sort of turned upside down, but just something happens. But it doesn't mean to say it's a failure. And with the China syndrome, it was March the 16th, 12 days after the China syndrome was released, you had the 3 Mile Island accident in Harrisburg. And so, however well it was doing in those first 12 days, the 3 Mile Island accident happened, and the film was guaranteed to be successful. I mean, I never go to the cinema. I've never gone to cinema. I don't like going to cinemas, even though I was 16 at the time. But even I saw this film shortly after it was released. Well, of course, and that was because the 3 Mile Island accident had happened. So that might be a case where the moon in the Via Combusta, probably square Jupiter, was really helping the film. I mean, better still if the film was released in the evening when the moon was in Scorpio, and that would really have started to have had an impact. There's quite a moon in Scorpio event that it was about to boost this film, as in the 3 Mile Island disaster. Well, sorry, it wasn't a disaster at all. 3 Mile Island disaster. It wasn't. It was an accident. It wasn't a disaster in 3 Mile Island. No one was killed. I don't even know if anyone got cancer because of the 3 Mile Island accident. Now, if you're looking at nuclear power, you probably want to consider the beginning of nuclear power and the horoscope for when nuclear power started, and this is it. December the 2nd, 1942 at 3:25 in Chicago. So this was, I think, at Chicago University when they created a nuclear pile, and is that the term, a nuclear pile? And at 3:25 the pile went critical. I don't know about the technical details, but that's when it went. That's when you had criticality. And so this chart was the beginning of the nuclear age. And Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter was in Cancer at the time of the release of the China syndrome and at the time of the 3 Mile Island accident. Was that a coincidence? I don't know. But we don't see any major angularity here at this moment when the pile went critical. We do see a fairly close conjunction between the Moon and Neptune. Maybe this idea about humans dealing with something that they don't really understand. I mean, okay, they understood it from a scientific point of view, but it's an incredibly powerful force, Moon conjunct Neptune, and you're dealing with things that can't be seen. They had to understand what was going on through devices picking up neutron radiation, and it was all very unseen, the energy of this nuclear pile when it went critical. And it was at a time, of course, remember, it was during the Second World War. So when we see big events in this chart, we're also seeing these reflected in the Second World War, but was raging at the time that it went critical. And Saturn is at 8 degrees Gemini, is opposition with Sun and Mercury and Venus. So I suppose you could see Saturn opposition Sun, Mercury and Venus symbolically, particularly that Sun opposition Saturn, as trying to control the power of the cosmos. It's all about control, isn't it? A nuclear pile. You have this uranium, and you remove the graphite rods, and as you remove the graphite rods, the activity in the reactor increases, and at a certain stage you have critical mass. And that's Saturn in Gemini, perhaps conjunct Uranus, trying to control Sun, Mercury, Venus in Sagittarius, the power of the universe. Maybe that's one way of looking at it. Although this Saturn-Uranus conjunction is quite wide. So you could see Uranus as the uranium and Saturn is the graphite control rods. That is a way of looking at it. That is a possible view. Now, as this is the start of the nuclear age, it might be then worth considering what was going on when nuclear accidents happened. Now, the worst nuclear accident in Britain was in 1957, which is the Windscale Fire. The Windscale Fire took place on October the 10th, 1957. I don't know what time. There was a report by this nuclear scientist Penny, which I think his name is William Penny, and he listed all the times that was going on as they lost control of this nuclear reactor, which was designed, its purpose was to produce plutonium for the British nuclear program, I think. And it was air cooled, and I think the problems were really starting by 5:40 a.m. By 3 p.m. the whole thing was on fire. But I wouldn't worry too much about the ascendant and the midheaven, even perhaps the moon with this, because we just don't know when precisely the fire started. But from a British perspective, it was a serious event. They estimate that a couple of hundred people got cancer at some stage. I don't know whether that was directly or whether they just made some statistical estimate, but they estimated a couple of hundred people got cancer. Windscale, it used to be, in the 80s, they changed its name to Sellafield. That's the main nuclear plutonium processing plant in the UK. I think the reason they changed its name from Windscale to Sellafield was that Windscale had such a bad name in the UK as far as nuclear pollution was concerned that they've maybe tried to get around it by changing its name to Sellafield. But Windscale used to have very scary connotations in England, the height of people's nuclear paranoia. I think there was a TV series called was it The Edge of Darkness or something, which talked about it. But people were really... it was a fictional drama. Yeah, it was Edge of Darkness. I don't think I really saw it, but Windscale was sort of an anti-iconic thing in Britain up until the 80s. But there was this fire in 1957. And there you can see the moon was opposition Neptune. And I mean, I'm not saying that it's a particularly dramatic chart. Pluto, there's Neptune and Pluto. Neptune and Pluto, we still have this sextile. The Neptune-Pluto sextile has sort of dominated the modern era. It's just always been there, this Neptune-Pluto sextile. And there was certainly a Neptune-Pluto sextile at the time of a Windscale Fire. And it was being picked up by the moon. Moon opposition Neptune, moon trine Pluto. And it seems reasonable to think that this was a time when things were starting to get out of control. And Neptune-Pluto is about something very uncontrollable. And I think it does refer to nuclear power. We are in the age of nuclear power. And at the time of this, look at the north nodes. The north nodes were square Uranus. So Uranus, there's a lot of uranium around. And so that sort of fits in. And you can always also throw Chiron in. In fact, there was a T-square, a grand cross, involving Uranus, Chiron, and the nodal axis. So that's a Windscale Fire. But then there's the question is, to what extent did the Windscale Fire trigger the chart of the pile going critical? And so here's the Windscale Fire. Sorry, not Windscale. Here is in the middle, in the center, I have the chart of the chain reaction, the beginning of nuclear power on December the 2nd, 1942. And the outer wheel is the Windscale Fire. And there is the sun at 10 degrees 2 minutes Sagittarius. And so Saturn was opposition the Chicago sun at the time of a Windscale Fire on October the 10th, 1957. And it was also picking up on this Sun-Saturn opposition. So there was a Sun-Saturn opposition in 1942 when the pile went critical. And at the time of a Windscale Fire, that opposition was being activated. And so this nuclear accident, which was downplayed at the time, I don't think if that kind of accident had happened today, people would have been as relaxed as they were then. Perhaps in 1957, people took authority figures seriously, and they took things at face value. If governments and scientists said, "Oh well, it was just operator error, perhaps, but it won't happen again," people will just accept that. But I don't think that would happen now. But still, it was the worst nuclear accident, I think, not just in England, but in the Western world up until that date, 1957. And yes, Saturn was hitting the Sun-Saturn opposition. So that's the Windscale Fire. Then we had 3 Mile Island. I don't know about the details of 3 Mile Island, but it certainly got a huge amount of publicity in the West, the 3 Mile Island accident. Here's the 3 Mile Island accident. I get 4 in the morning, March the 28th, 1979. That is actually set. Why is that set for Philadelphia? I think it should be set for. Sorry about that. I think that should be set for Harrisburg, shouldn't it? It was in Harrisburg, I think. I mean, it's not going to make a big It's not going to make a big difference. But I think I should just be accurate and say make it Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Sorry about that. Yeah, it doesn't make a big difference to the chart. So it happened around the time of the new moon, and there's Jupiter at 29 Aquarius. Now there is Saturn at 8 Virgo, 8:33 Virgo. At the time of the 3 Mile accident, so Saturn was actually square the Saturn of the Chicago chart, the 1942 Chicago chart. Saturn was also starting to make a square of the Sun. It's not exact, but Saturn square Saturn, I think that's possibly quite important. It was a bit of a watershed for the nuclear power industry, because people were already nervous about nuclear power. The Karen Silkwood thing, where the whistleblower at that Oklahoma plutonium plant in Oklahoma, obviously in Oklahoma, where was it? Okay, yeah. Where you had that film Silkwood, and that was in 1974 when Silkwood died. We don't know quite how, but so people were nervous about it, and the fact that the China syndrome came out and it did well, and then you had the 3 Mile Island. I think that 3 Mile Island was a bit of a disaster for the nuclear industry, even though it wasn't in itself a disaster. No one was killed. I don't think anyone was seriously radiated. But you can see the whole concept of nuclear energy, with the chart of that nuclear reaction in Chicago, Saturn square Saturn. So that fits, doesn't it? And it is undermining the reputation of nuclear power. And you can also see that the moon was trine the sun of. So the moon at the time of the 3 Mile Island accident was trine the 1942 sun, so that perhaps allowed things to happen quickly, allowed things to get out of control. And we can look at the full moon just before the lunation before the 3 Mile Island accident. So the 3 Mile Island accident happened just after a new moon at around 7 Aries. So let's go back to the chart of the 3 Mile Island, and let's get the lunation immediately prior. Let's see if there's anything happening there. So, but this is the lunation set for Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, March 27, 1979, just the day before, and there's Uranus. Uranus was exactly on the ascendant on March 27th, 1979, at the time of the accident. So that really fits, doesn't it? Uranus is about nuclear power, and it was on the ascendant. Then we move to the big one, Chernobyl. I've talked about Chernobyl a lot, so I mean I could spend hours talking about the Chernobyl chart. But the Chernobyl chart, which 38th anniversary today, called the Chernobyl explosion. At the time of the Chernobyl explosion, Uranus was exactly rising. With the 3 Mile Island, we saw that Uranus was rising at the time of the new moon immediately previous to it. With the Chernobyl explosion, Uranus was rising absolutely at the time of it. And this is a beautiful chart. I mean, obviously it's a horrific chart, but it just works so well. There's Sun at 522 Taurus, opposition Pluto, Sun opposition Pluto, exactly there. Moon is in Scorpio. It's not a great place for the moon, is it? But Uranus rising and the Sun opposition Pluto is really powerful, I think. And looking at the chart from a heliocentric point of view, this is Chernobyl heliocentrically. From a heliocentric perspective, there we can see the Sun exactly conjunct the Pluto, and that Sun conjunct Pluto is trine Jupiter, and it is sextile Neptune. So remember, trines and sextiles from a heliocentric perspective are not always fortunate. So the Earth, trine Jupiter, conjunct Pluto, sextile and Earth, the Earth sextile Neptune. You see, it's Earth, it's what's happening here on Earth. The heliocentric chart shows Earth, and that does indicate the accident. And of course, people died because of Chernobyl. A lot of people died, not just at the time of it, when people got radiated, but you had a lot of children were exposed, got thyroid cancer, because the Soviet regime was slow in, and they were having a May Day parade, so they didn't want to make a big thing about it, and they didn't release iodine tablets. It was all because of face. And so people died, people got sick. So it's not surprising that there was a very close heliocentric Mars conjunct Saturn, Mars-Saturn, the death pair at the time of Chernobyl. So the heliocentric chart for Chernobyl is really powerful. And if you want sort of evidence that heliocentric astrology should be used, then certainly the Chernobyl chart should certainly be considered. So go back to the normal chart, and so that's Chernobyl. That happened, yes, 38 years ago today. And finally, there is Fukushima. So Fukushima, 2011. This is a chart for Fukushima. We don't know exactly when it happened. Because remember, there was a tsunami, and we had the tsunami, and that caused damage, and there was a hydrogen explosion. It just happened over the course of the day. So it would be nice to have a precise moment for Fukushima, but we don't really have it. And in the Fukushima chart, we do not have anything at 8 mutable. So with the 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, I forgot to point this out. So just quickly going back to Chernobyl. At the time of Chernobyl, Saturn was at 9 degrees Sagittarius. So if you compare the Chernobyl chart with if you compare the Windscale Fire, Chernobyl happened on the Windscale Fire's, close to the Windscale Fire's Saturn return, if you can imagine that. So Saturn was at 910 Sagittarius at the time of both the Windscale Fire and Chernobyl. And also, I should point out that Chernobyl's 10 degrees 22 Sagittarius. Sorry, I got the three. Yes, so Chernobyl's Saturn at 9 degrees 21 Sagittarius was on the 922 Sagittarius, was on the Sun of the chain reaction 1942 chart. So it was Chernobyl's Saturn was picking up on the Sun-Saturn opposition. So that means to say that 3 Mile Island, the Windscale Fire, and Chernobyl, they all picked up on the December the 2nd, 1942 chart, that that opposition between Saturn, that Sun-Saturn opposition in that chain reaction chart. So going back to Fukushima, the chart doesn't have anything at 9-10 mutable. So in that sense, it's not so powerful. But what I did want to point out is Uranus. Uranus is the planet of explosions. And Uranus was exactly on the fixed star Skeet. Skeet is about particularly disasters at sea. And of course, Fukushima was caused by a tsunami. That was the immediate cause. So Uranus on Skeet would be Uranus, nuclear, Skeet, disasters connected with the sea. So that Uranus on Skeet completely summed everything up in terms of what was going on at Fukushima. And I'm not really going to look at the rest of the chart. So those are a few thoughts on nuclear power and nuclear accidents. And I think that there is a warning here that if we're trying to predict future nuclear accidents, we should be very much looking at that degree area about 8, 9, 10 degrees mutable. So if you see something at 8, 9, 10 degrees mutable, that might be a warning sign. So, for example, we've just had Saturn at 8, 9 degrees Pisces, and as far as I know, nothing happened. If you look at the future, if I was trying to predict a nuclear accident in the future, I might say, for example, go to 2028 and see 2028. We've got Uranus at around 8 degrees, Gemini. So I can pick a date here from this and say, well, in June 2028, there is a conjunction between Mars and Uranus at 11 Gemini. And Uranus will be at 8 Gemini in May 2028, and maybe around June, June 21st, 2028. That might be a possible time when we might see a nuclear accident. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but that is the logic we should be using. And so I'm just thinking that we can use these charts, the chart for the chain reaction, and then looking at 3 Mile Island, the Windscale Fire, and Chernobyl, to try and project the thing into the future. So that might be a way of predicting, yes, future nuclear accidents. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for listening. If you found this video interesting, I would be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would of course be really grateful if you were to subscribe, and if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.